Brain is absolutely ridiculous and one of the least understood aspects of the natural kingdom. We don't even understand how the brain of a worm works, so how on earth are we meant to comprehend our own evolved grey matter? Psychology has only been officially studied for around 130 years and we're still making huge discoveries every year. My mum's a psychologist, so I grew up hearing about all this stuff and really took for granted some of the things I learned. So like any responsible millennial, I decided to start a podcast about it and share the sweet, sweet gift of therapy. I'm sat on the couch with my mum, Sandy. She's a psychologist with over 20 years experience studying and treating clients. Hi mum.
Hi Adam.
We're going to release a new episode each week talking about a different aspect of mental health and therapy, and hopefully some of you will find it useful. All of our episodes are going to be on YouTube if you want to watch us actually sit on the sofa and in front of the fire. We've just lit it, it's really warm. And also, if you go on YouTube today, I have a horrible mug that has like hot chocolate around the top, which mum's really embarrassed about, and I have holes in both of my socks. So you can go on YouTube and check out while I'm embarrassing our family. Yeah, that'll be on the Sofa Pod on YouTube, or if you want to give us a follow on Instagram, it's at on the Sofa Pod. Rate us 5 stars on iTunes, all that good stuff, because we want to reach as many people as possible. We spoke about different methodologies. We spoke about CBT, talked about behavioural therapy, we talked about PCT, and then today we're going to be talking about psychodynamic therapy. What is psychodynamic?
So this is one of my favourites. It mainly looks at behavioural patterns and personality evolution from childhood. It sees human functioning based upon the interaction of drives and forces within each individual, specifically unconscious elements. It's quite interesting.
Right. So
and also between the different structures of the personality.
Okay.
So
there's a lot to dig into here because I don't understand much of what you just said.
It is stated that our feelings, motives and decisions are actually powerfully influenced by our past experiences and then stored in our unconscious minds. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The use of this type of therapy is normally used for anxiety, BPD, depression, eating disorders, PTSD, panic disorders, substance disorders, etc., etc.
So almost everything.
Yeah. Psychodynamic approach began its journey during 1895 with Sigmund Freud.
All know Freud. Big player in the game.
Yeah. Other theorists involved in the evolution of the approach were Jung, Klein, Anna Freud, Freud's daughter.
Really?
And Erickson, to name but a few. So, pros and cons?
Can we go backwards a sec?
Backwards.
What did you just say? What is all? Obviously, I understood like the history, like where it came from, but what is, like layman's terms? What is this theory?
So, the idea is that whatever's kind of wrong with you right now, like enduring problems, not surface stuff, but enduring problems, was initiated and stored during childhood, but not in the conscious mind, in the unconscious mind.
Okay.
And it determines. You've heard that saying, "Give me the boy till he's 7 and I'll give you the man."
Yes.
So it's kind of, that buys into that. It's kind of saying that your personality and your behaviours, etc., are developed
in those early years.
And the therapy interprets things that are happening. So if you came in and you were presenting with anxiety and I said to you, how long have you had it? Oh, it's really only just got bad in the last year. Well, you've never had it before that. And then they'll say, well, actually, yeah, I have had it.
Maybe at school a few times.
I had it at school. In fact, I think I've always had it.
But it's maybe only presented to a... Oh, you had a fly. For those YouTube watchers, you just saw Mum batting a fly out of her face. You can... Basically, you saying that people might only be aware of it now because they become more self-aware, or that maybe it's come on in a more extreme way. And it's only after you highlight, but when did it really start, if we dig back, that people are like, oh, actually, all my friends weren't really anxious before that exam, and I felt really anxious before it. And then, I used to feel a bit anxious when I got home or whatever. And
Yeah.
they realise, sort of thing.
But sometimes it takes a while to get to that because they often say, I don't know, I don't know, I can't remember. So then I'll talk about mum and dad. Mum was such a worrier. She worried all the time. And then you think about the biology behind that and how the worrying biochemicals, cortisol, etc., travel across the placenta to the baby.
Seriously?
Yeah. So it's almost like the mother will probably not be aware of that.
Or alcohol or drugs, if you indulge in those things when you're pregnant, some of those chemicals will travel across to the baby. And the same with extreme stress and anxiety.
Cortisol. Lots of biochemicals that aren't really good for the baby. So that could create a template in that baby's brain.
To like expect those levels of cortisol.
Yeah, and so that's nature, right? And if you go into nurture, because they're all connected, if the baby can sense when it's born that the mother is of a lot of anxiety, then the template's already there in the brain, and so it just goes meshes together.
For sure.
So we've got an anxious child.
Right, and it can really be not from birth, but it can be
pre-birth.
The idea, it can make someone more vulnerable before they're born, and then if they're born into the right environment, it will sort of foster an anxiety-ridden individual. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So I always say to people that are trying to have a baby and they're really struggling for a long time, and after being with them for a while, I can tell they're both anxious.
Right.
And they're getting more anxious because this baby isn't coming in. They're talking about IVF.
And they're putting so much pressure on it. Yeah.
And they've had all the tests. There's nothing wrong. And I say to them, just give me 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. Work with me for 4 or 5 weeks. And guess what? Most of the time, not all of the time, there's a big smile on their face.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's stress. It's destroying nature.
Yeah. Obviously, stress hormones can be so destructive. So, okay, I think I understand now. So the psychodynamic approach is basically seeing issues that you have now and then tracing them back and being like, well, actually, these came from 20 years ago, even if you're not aware of it. Okay.
So where are we?
Pros and cons.
The pros of the psychodynamic approach. This was one of the first talking cure therapies, plus many psychological therapies are now based along psychodynamic work.
Right.
Freud was the first person to highlight the importance of childhood in mental health, and this idea is used extensively today. The lovely thing about this approach, sorry, that shows I love it.
Bias.
Is that it includes both sides of nature-nurture debate, which I think is absolutely 100% important.
So I think, is there an argument that nature is more important than nurture and nurture is more important than nature, whereas this is saying, well, actually, they're both really important?
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely.
So adult personality is the product of innate drives, which are nature, that we're born with, and childhood experience are from the nurtured way that we are raised. So for me, it just makes such logical sense.
Absolutely, but this is now where you're getting to the point where I think most people maybe people don't know what psychology is, but I think this is the bit that I think of as psychology. The other thing, maybe CBT as well, but the PCT approach is just talking to somebody in a really empathetic way. I don't really consider that, obviously it is psychology, but that's the simple side of it, whereas I think the psychodynamic work you do with a therapist is really smart. It's really clever, and it's that stuff that people just don't consider. Everyone's got issues, and they don't think, well, maybe that person's angry because their parents were always angry at them, but they don't trace it back that far. They just think that they've got a short fuse or whatever.
And there's nothing better than knowing why you're like you are.
Yeah.
And I think that this really shows you that, because it can go back.
And I guess if you realise that actually, you know, you have anger problems because your parents had anger problems, it takes a lot of the pressure off you, a lot of the blame almost that you must have on yourself for having those issues. And
it's important not to blame anyone really, because his parents are the way they are because of their parents.
Right.
So it goes back and back and back. And it isn't until... Do you remember I used to say to you, I don't believe in smacking children, and I don't.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary. And the reason I did that was personal, because I wanted to break a cycle of smacking children.
For sure. So do you think we live in quite an exciting time? Because I think this is the first educated generation on mental health.
Yeah.
Probably my age group, 20s, 30s.
Definitely.
So do you think that, obviously there's a long way to go, but generally the children of my generation will be a lot healthier mental health wise than any generation that's come before? Or will different issues present, do you think?
I think, as is the norm, different issues will present. There'll be more knowledge about how children should be treated. I mean, young children say now, if you hit me, Dad, I will tell social services. You know,
really?
And they mean
children
it.
That you see?
Yeah, like 8-9-year-olds.
Wow.
Or they'll say, I know the number for Childline.
Wow.
So, and that's great.
Well, it's not great that children are in the position that they have to know the number for Childline. No, but it's great that they are. Correct, yeah. It's great that they're educated enough to know that that's the thing to do. And
I think schools are playing a bit of a part now.
Yeah,
definitely. Things like that.
I saw there was a great documentary with Ronan Kemp.
Oh yeah, I told you.
You told me about it.
That, yeah.
And he goes into a school and they're talking about depression with 7 and 8-year-olds. But like, all the kids are saying, "Oh, that could make you depressed. That could make you feel sad. That could make you anxious." I didn't even know what anxiety was when I was 7 years old, and I think probably our generation's parents, like your generation, would have said to me, "Oh, you're too young to learn about that stuff." When actually it is good. Kids don't grow up any faster. They're just more aware of stuff, I think.
Yeah, I remember saying to Max when he was... When did Max leave Brooklands?
2010.
Yeah, you were 8. So he's leaving this school where his best friend is, Lawrence, and... but I knew the school was about to crash.
Yeah, it wasn't a good place.
And you might remember this, Max. I took him to the clinic only because I had office work to do, and he was crying like, you know, when kids go...
Hyperventilating, yeah.
Like this. And he was really sad, really, really sad to leave the school he liked and his friend. And I told him this story about... you know, at the seaside when the waves come crashing across and it's a bit scary in the sea because you think, oh, this wave's never going to stop, but it always crashes and then you're fine. Well, that's like how you feel now with this sadness. It'll keep hitting you. But eventually, do you remember that, Max?
Yeah.
Eventually, it'll break and you'll be fine. And then as the days go on, it won't be there anymore. Yeah. It'll disappear.
Same as all grief, hopefully, if it's processed well. Max, by the way, is my brother, and he's sort of doing the cameras. Say hi, Max.
Hello.
So if you hear anyone scurrying about, that's Max. Okay, so you talked about the pros of psychodynamic. What are the cons? What are the issues with it?
So it largely ignores that we do actually have a thinking brain.
Okay.
It's prone to ignore the biological genetic factors that influence and contribute to mental health. So what that means is, so let's just say somebody with Asperger's, they wouldn't necessarily take into account, oh, well, his dad's got it.
Oh, right, okay.
They could very easily overlook that
because it's so focused on treatment and other factors.
Unconscious mind.
Right.
So very deterministic, with little room for free will. It's classed as a reductionist approach, as it simplifies the human mind into id, which is the biological, the ego, which is nurture, the way that we're brought up, the mediator between the unrealistic id and the external real world is the superego, which incorporates the values and morals of society which are learned from parents and others. The id and superego are parts of the unconscious mind and in constant conflict with the conscious parts of the ego. We don't need to go into all that.
Okay. Mum's made notes before the podcast, which is why all this is coming across so fluently, by the way. She's spent a long time planning all of this.
Yeah, well, it's a lot to squeeze in 2 days.
It's a busy 2 days.
The psychodynamic approach is useful when explaining the nature of human development and aspects of mental functioning. It's also important when we are looking to understand ourselves and why we behave as we do.
Right, okay.
And how patterns of behaviour and personality have evolved.
Yeah, completely understand.
You understand?
Yeah.
So I think it provides a holistic focus on the perspective of the client, their deep-seated needs, their urges and desires. The main goals of therapy are to enhance the client's self-awareness, as it is in any therapy really, and foster an understanding of the client's thoughts, feelings and beliefs in real action.
And this gives you that overview of
to their past,
where you can kind of trace it forwards almost, and you find this issue way back. You're like, well, this explains all of these other things, where a lot of, I think, people who are in therapy find that actually they're like running around trying to extinguish all these little fires all the time, instead of just turning the gas off almost. Like all these little issues are popping up all the time, and they spend so long in therapy trying to, I'm anxious about travel. We'll solve the travel, and then it's like, well, now I'm anxious about work. Let's sort that out. And I'm anxious about my boyfriend. I'm going to sort that out. And actually, if you go way back, it's because of something that happened a long time ago. And if you just resolve that one issue, all these other symptoms would go away.
Probably.
When I first went to therapy, and the lady was like, well, what issues are you experiencing? Like, why are you here? And I told her all these things, like, I don't have, my memory's really bad, and I feel really tired all the time, etc., etc., etc. And she said, no, I said issues, not like all that you've said is symptoms. Like, these are just things that are happening because of issues, but none of this is a problem. Like, these will all go away once we solve the issue. And that was a big thing for me, because I noticed all these issues, in inverted commas, with my life, but actually they went back to something else, and it wasn't anything to do with what the immediate presenting issues that I had. It was completely unrelated.
And that's quite an interesting finding, isn't it?
Yeah, I think when someone says like they're just symptoms, it's good. I guess, like, for example, using coronavirus as an example, if you've got a cough, we now know that actually you don't have a cough, you've got coronavirus, and the cough is just a symptom of this other virus. It's kind of similar. Like, you could struggle with insomnia and anxiety, but actually the problem is, I don't know, your parents kept waking you up every night as a kid, like shouting or whatever, and that's where that came from.
And another thing which is important to know is that if you think of a traffic light system, if a child is being brought up in a very chaotic environment, then they're normally living in amber or red. Being
like levels of stress, green, yellow,
high state of alert.
Yeah.
Their brain is programmed, let's say, to live in amber, high amber. So their body will be full of biochemicals that keep you in fight-flight mode. A lot of people say, I just always wake up at 3 o'clock or between 2 and 4. And that's normally when you're falling into this REM sleep.
Deep sleep, yeah.
But if you live in amber, your body's going to say, oh my goodness, because all the biochemicals are slowing down. I'm moving out of high alert. So you wake up because the brain says, we
can't afford to be in
green.
Good
grief, no, the body can't. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
If somebody's coming with insomnia, straight away I'm thinking, I wonder where that comes from.
Yeah, it's anxiety.
It might not be.
In that
from
case,
there.
the insomnia is the symptom, but the anxiety is the problem. Right? No?
Well, I guess because anxiety is a symptom.
So insomnia is a symptom of a symptom, and then you get to the insomnia, then you get things like, and then the anxiety is a symptom of something else. So none of the issues that you thought they had were issues.
The anxiety could be a symptom of the childhood chaos.
Okay.
If it's that
Yes,
long.
that makes sense. So what we said, psychodynamic therapy is really good at treating and like really good at helping. We also said like the limitations of it is that it kind of ignores the fact that we're really complex and that maybe these things aren't just, influenced by our past experiences. But do you think it is really fundamental? It's something that...
I've put a note here. It's not so useful because it places so much emphasis on the childhood when in reality our personality development should be considered
Continuous.
Lifelong.
Yeah.
And not limited to childhood.
That makes sense. And as well, I think in therapy, it's a therapist's job to join dots. And sometimes dots that maybe don't have anything to do with each other could be joined using this, right? You could say, well, actually, this happened to a kid and that could be influencing you now. And actually, that isn't the case at all.
No, it can also run the risk of blaming the caregivers for any emotional symptoms being experienced, when in reality, it may be a combination of factors, people involved in the outcome. It works in reality by focusing, as I said, on the unconscious processes as they manifested in the client's behaviour. So, in view of that, I think it plays a big part. It has to play a big part. But I think you have to remember things change.
That's kind of it for this, actually. We're kind of done with the methodology month that we wanted to do.
What I wanted to say...
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
I think... So I'm an integrative therapist.
So you want to use lots of different methodologies
Yeah,
at
and
once.
maybe that's more understandable now. So I think CBT has a place. Person-centred definitely has a place. And psychodynamic definitely has a place. And I add other things in there like Gestalt.
Yeah. These are just the...
These are the three main for me. And there's lots of other object relations. I use that, which is very psychoanalytical as well. So I won't confuse the issue, but I mix and mash. So
if you're trying to find a therapist, just because you're seeing the big CBT headline, make sure that they also understand, and I'm sure they will, but they understand other therapy types and other methodologies, because maybe seeing a counsellor that just knows CBT isn't going to be the best fit for you for reasons that we discussed a few weeks ago.
And like we said in the last episode, person-centred is not for everyone. On its own.
It needs other stuff. So hopefully everyone understands a little bit more about how psychology works then, because that is kind of what we just discussed. The next month is your idea, it was a really good one, is Why Am I Like I Am month. So we've got 4 episodes on like attachments with different people in your life. So I think we're starting with parents, and then friends, then partners, relationships, and finishing with like bereavement and big life things. So that's going to be a good few episodes. Hope everyone's enjoyed this one. If you don't follow us on Instagram, it's @onthesofapod. I think I'm getting there now. I'm remembering it every time. And hopefully we'll see you next week.